In certain circumstances, police officers have essentially a license to kill.
Cell phone video was posted on social media leading to
a recent incident where a white La Mesa police officer repeatedly shoved a young black man while making an arrest at the Rosemont trolley station.
Sit down.
San Diego police officer had his gun drawn. The boy says he was
just come towards us, all right? Come over here.
Right now is a community review board. It can't do any independent investigation of complaints against police. So it really lacks the independence that's needed for the community at large to feel comfortable about decisions made about police misconduct.
An officer grabbed him, threw him to the ground, started beating him in front of his 5-year-old daughter. And
any agency,
you guys are beating him up!
Any person, any official, anybody
you guys are beating him up! Why are you beating him up?
Who is given the right to take away the rights of others must be held to a higher standard.
This trust created by the CRB's lack of independence really negatively impacts the relationship between the police and the community. The community simply does not trust a process that is not fully independent. And so that's what this charter amendment is designed to fix.
I am an attorney. I have been practicing as an attorney for more than 30 years. I started out doing civil litigation. Then I moved on to doing appellate work, both civil appeals and criminal appeals. And then along the way, I was bitten by the social justice bug. And so I've done quite a bit of pro bono work in the social justice arena.
San Diego activists are finally getting the police review ballot measure they've wanted. Measure B would scrap the existing board called the Community Review Board on Police Practices and create an independent commission with subpoena power.
What communities are insisting on is not only the structural change in how the commission works, but also a culture change. The community has clearly said it wants SDPD to be transparent, but the community also felt that CRB was not transparent. And so there's a culture shift within the new commission that I, for my small part, have been trying to build into the transition process. I'm Patrick Anderson. I'm a professor in the Department of Communication and the Department of Ethnic Studies at UC San Diego. I'm also a commissioner on the Commission of Police Practices for the City of San Diego. In San Diego, the form of oversight that existed beginning in the 1980s was largely the result of one event.
About 30 years ago, a young man by the name of Sagan Penn was racially profiled while he was driving home with some friends. An altercation with the police ensued.
The officers are documented as having made racist comments. He was pulled from his truck, and one of the officers began beating him.
He fought back.
The police department investigated this situation. The district attorney charged the man with murder.
And what is your plea? Not guilty, sir.
You honestly thought that the officers were going to kill Mr. Penn right there in front of 50 people?
Yes.
You honestly did believe that?
Yes, I mean, the way they were beating him.
Ladies and gentlemen, when you have to call the police to stop the police, then you have a rather poor society indeed.
Sagan Penn was tried, and there was a hung jury after 2 trials.
This is the verdict with regard to count 1, the charge of first-degree murder. The verdict reads, "We, the jury in the above entitled cause, find the defendant Sagan Penn not guilty of the crime of first-degree murder."
Sagan Penn, after 2 trials, was not convicted. He was acquitted of almost every charge and released. the end of his trials, the judge made some pretty strong comments about San Diego Police Department's attempts to cover up evidence that would have exonerated Sagan Penn. Now, there were a lot of other events in the 1980s that were very similar, documented cases of Black and brown communities being mistreated in interactions with the police. But it was the case of Sagan Penn that really was the spark. And because of that, a Citizens Advisory Task Force was set up.
The San Diego City Council put a measure on the ballot in 1988 to create what's called the CRB, the Citizens Review Board. And that was going to be made up of community members to oversee complaints against the police. And it was a fairly robust measure, but the San Diego Police Department did not care for that robust measure. The police union supported a competing measure and placed that measure on the ballot in opposition to the measure that the city council had placed on the ballot. Both measures won, but the police department's measure won by a little bit more. So that became our CRB. So essentially, the police department's oversight, the citizens' oversight, or the community's oversight of police, was created by a measure that was written and supported by the police themselves.
I'm Caroline Collins, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at UC San Diego in the Department of Communication. My pathway to police oversight hasn't necessarily taken a direct route. I'm actually a scholar of communication who's primarily concerned with how cultures make meaning through remembrance. For years, I've partnered with communities to tell stories that are important to them. And so Patrick reached out to me about this project and about breathable streets, and we talked about Measure B. So I joined the collective to think about how we could work with communities for them to be able to think through and express their histories with policing. I've been nothing but inspired by the folks who've been on the ground doing this work for so long, and I'm just honored that I can contribute in my own small way.
First, just briefly go over some of the things that have happened in the recent past that have caused the community to lack trust in the police department and also the review of complaints. I want to remind the council that in March of 2015, the federal government issued a report after reviewing 17 complaints of the San Diego Police Department. The federal review revealed that the police department, that there were gaps in their policies and practices, and there was a lack of consistent supervision and a failure to hold personnel accountable. We can't forget the death of Fredun Nihad. We cannot forget just 2 months ago the horrible allegations of sexual misconduct by an officer who allegedly solicited a child for sex. We can't forget Eddie Alvarez, who was beaten and jailed simply because he was exercising his right to film at a protest. And of course, there's Aaliyah Jenkins. And this is what she was before, a young mother who unfortunately, once she was arrested, even though she became unconscious, she was not given medical care, and she died 10 days later.
I remember, I have so many memories about the CRB. I think some of the most heartbreaking memories I have are from some of our open meetings. So these are meetings where we're not permitted to talk about the details of any particular case, but they're meetings where the public is present and is able to talk to us. And I can remember family members of community members who were shot and killed by police officers showed up. And in the public comment portion of those meetings, they would tell their stories, and they would talk about in intimate ways the loved one they had lost. And I remember the people running that meeting, the one I'm obviously thinking of one, having no response to that moment of public grieving, and instead responding by saying, "Thank you, your time is up." That's really a kind of allegory for what, in my opinion, was wrong with the CRB.
I don't want to belabor this, but I want to make sure that the committee understands why trust needs to be regained. The problem is the limits of power that the current CRB has. The current CRB is a review model, meaning it just reviews the findings and conclusions of the police department. It cannot engage in independent investigation.
After you get over the profound sadness at witnessing this take place, you then find yourself in a situation of real anger. It's hard to describe the experience of actually reading these cases, watching the body-worn camera footage over and over and over from multiple angles, multiple officers' points of view. The emotional and psychological effects of just bearing witness to that over and over and over again was made so much worse by the knowledge that we had so little power. There was almost nothing we could do.
Individuals in the community realized that the CRB was not the organization that the community really needed to conduct oversight of the police. So they decided that they would create a new ballot measure that would create a really strong oversight of the police. And I wrote a draft of an amendment to the San Diego City Charter to create a new commission. The old CRB was merely a review model that just reviewed investigations done by the police themselves. The new commission is independent of the city, as independent as it can be. But also the model that the new commission uses is a hybrid. So they certainly can review, but they can also do their own original source investigation. In conducting an investigation, it can subpoena documents and witnesses so that it can get the information that it needs. And the old CRB had no power like that. Another really important difference is that of the attorney. The old CRB got all of its advice from the city attorney. In fact, it was required to get all of its advice from the city attorney. Well, the city attorney is the same attorney for the police department. So the city attorney has the duty to protect the police. And that same attorney was also the attorney for the CRB, which was in the minds of most lay people a real conflict. The new commission is not allowed to have the city attorney as its attorney. It's been a long process. It's been at least 5 or 6 years that I've been working with this. I and others throughout the community worked very hard to gather support. And then we took that support and started talking to city council members. Those years when we were trying to get on the ballot, we were opposed by some really powerful forces. The police unions in San Diego County are very, very powerful, and they did not want to see this change take place. We were betrayed, we were sabotaged by government officials, but we really knew that if we could just get on the ballot, we knew that people would support us. We tried to get onto the ballot in 2016, again in 2018, but it wasn't until 2020 that we finally got onto the ballot. Once we got onto the ballot, we then had to wage a full-on campaign just like a candidate.
When the police police themselves, Measure B supporters say that leads to a lack of trust between officers and the community.
Police officers are professionals, just like doctors and lawyers and dentists. And so they deserve to be treated in the same way that other professionals are treated. And that means having independent oversight.
Youth council in Mid-City can, these local youth activists pounding the pavement to get the word out about Measure B and San Diegans for Justice.
It is
a measure that is going to help create trust.
Measure B needs a simple majority to pass.
We won. We won with 75% of the vote.
75% of the vote. More than any other ballot measure, more than any politician elected that year.
The measure means the city will now have a commission on police practices, which would have members appointed by the city council, along with its own staff and an independent attorney. But first, the city council needs to draft and pass an implementation ordinance that will lay out how the new commission works, how many members it will have, and how those members will be chosen.
Now it's up to the city council to write and pass an implementation ordinance that that builds the commission in the spirit of that.
It's been an excruciatingly difficult process to get the CPP ordinance in place.
The city charter governs everything. In fact, a fun fact about San Diego, there's a part of the city charter written long ago, decades ago, that says residents in the city of San Diego shall never pay for garbage collection. And so that's why if you live in the city of San Diego, you don't get a trash bill the way that people in most cities do. So the city charter is sort of like the constitution for the city of San Diego. And when a ballot measure passes, it gets written into the city charter. By law, the city attorney has to oversee that process. And so the city attorney is simultaneously in charge of writing Measure B into an implementation ordinance into the city charter, and the attorney of the police department.
After the November 2020 election, San Diegans for Justice, along with the new CPP, had forums where we got information from people as to exactly what they wanted to see in this ordinance.
It's extremely important to me that every stage of this transition process be transparent and be focused on what the community wants.
Just a quick question. What's the length of the term for a commissioner?
That has yet to be determined, Charlie. What do you suggest it be?
Oh, wow, put me on the spot.
Well, I mean, that's what everybody is.
If we're going to be having folks who I think historically are never asked to or allowed to be on commissions like this, that we're thinking about things that would discourage
a transition in terms of the new people learning how it's done with the old people. In other words, they need.
Previously, we were advocating for 2 youth seats because young people
issue of compensation or at least reimbursement of costs for members, time, childcare, transportation, and so forth.
And I'll point out again that Poppy and I are going to record all of these comments, including.
And Patrick Anderson of UCSD compiled all this information, gave all this information to the city council and also to the city attorney who was writing this ordinance. And then the city did nothing with that. None of that information was included in any real way in the new ordinance.
This ordinance guts Measure B because it defines investigation to mean just looking at secondhand sources. So it defines investigation so broadly that instead of doing an investigation as we see it, an investigation of original sources, interviewing people, instead the commission can just review what the police department has done, which essentially means it would still be acting exactly like the old CRP. There are a couple of provisions in the ordinance that say that essentially they can go behind closed doors and decide what the commission's procedures are going to be. The Police Officers Association can do this. And this negotiation is private because it's called collective bargaining. That is reprehensible. That has got to come out. There are so many things in here that are just shocking to me. There is nowhere in this ordinance that requires SDPD to give any of the complaints they receive to the commission.
And it was really stunning. You have to remember that 75% of the voters voted in favor of Measure B. I mean, there is huge support for the CPP and the reform that it promises. The city has everything at its disposal to give the community a really good ordinance that meets the needs of the community Yet they've completely failed to do that. Fortunately, that initially proposed ordinance is going to be rewritten. Women Occupy and members of the community, they asked for the city to find what they call outside counsel to write the ordinance. The city attorney, much to her credit, very quickly agreed to do that. Friday, January 21st at 2 p.m. in front of PSLN. We want every single person on this call, if you can, every person that you know, to turn out for PSLN and let them know that we did not come this far just so that SDPD could once again do everything it can to try to control the commission. And so we're waiting to see that first draft from the outside counsel.
The story of Measure B, I believe, is the story of communities in San Diego coming together. You're interviewing us today on February 3rd, 2022. Just a few weeks ago, one of the committees of the city council that is charged with putting the commission in place had the meeting in which that ordinance was being considered.
This should be a public and transparent process, and that the
we
public
need people to be able to read this and comment on it to remove the provision about the collective bargaining.
Call in support of San Diegans for Justice, Mid-City Can, Women Occupy,
urge you to keep to the intent of the voters by adding the 4 amendments provided by San
And for
Diego
over 2 hours,
for including 2 youth seats on the commission and for correcting the ordinance to give
Councilmember Montgomery Stepp and D4 for all their hard work on this
people
ordinance, but
from
it's still
all
not
walks of
reflective
life
of the
in San
community
Diego.
demands. I agree with all the recommendations by the CPP, by San
equity, and
Diegans for
public
Justice,
trust
Mid-City
by
Can.
making the amendments
Showed
that
up
have been
for public
requested today,
comment.
especially the removal of the previously criminally convicted
opportunities
from this
to regain the trust of the progressive
And spoke with one
for collective bargaining
voice.
considerations, and any references to collective bargaining
series of requirements
should be
they must meet
removed
were likely to deter most from applying.
About what the community wanted in this ordinance.
Most.
You, our representatives.
We ask you
the
to make
Commission
the
on Police
following
Practices
additional
is an excellent opportunity to encourage police accountability in San Diego, but we must advocate for the future we envision. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the PSNLN committee listened, and we've still got a few things to work out, but most of those community demands are now included in the ordinance. That's the story of Measure B. The story of Measure B is the story of Women Occupy, who in 2012 realized that the old model wasn't working and began showing up for 10 years to CRB open meetings to speak publicly about the problem. It's the story of Youth Council in Mid-City Can. It's the story of Andrea St. Julian and San Diegans for Justice, including Marisa Talbert, writing Measure B and getting it on the ballot. It's the story of pillars of the community showing up constantly to press city leaders. It's the story of the NAACP and the ACLU and Jewish Family Services coming together to talk about what was important about Measure B. It's the story of the National Lawyers Guild and the Tom Homan Law Foundation and the Earl B. Gilliam Law Association and so many other groups of lawyers coming together to make sure that the new commission lives up to and does everything that Measure B wants it to do and everything that California law allows it to do. And the story of Measure B is also the story of Council Member and Council President Pro Tem Monica Montgomery Stepp and her office standing by the community throughout this process to prioritize this ordinance and ensure that it does everything Measure B can do. It's the story of people from large and small community organizations coming to a year-long series of roundtables and other forums, listening to one another and deciding together what this new commission should do.
Also want to let people know that we have organizations from La Jolla, Southeastern San Diego, Claremont Town Council, We have support throughout every part of this
One thing
city.
that really resonated with me attending all of the multiple roundtables was just how connected and how in agreement so many folks were across various communities. That didn't mean that there were not disagreements, but there was a cohesive push that this was something that needed to, one, be passed, and once it was passed, that we had to hold the city accountable and hold their feet to the fire to make sure that they actually executed what the people had asked for. And so surprisingly, and perhaps not surprisingly, some of the largest challenges that I witnessed was the ways in which bureaucracy used itself and used its slowness and all of the turning gears to seemingly try to whittle away at folks' energy. But even as we saw just a couple of weeks ago, when we're now more than a year out from this really historic vote, folks might be tired, but they're still showing up.
I think what is most important is looking toward the future, and that we understand there is a lot of work to do.
They are still making their voices heard, and they're still letting the city know that we expect to be heard and we expect this measure to be executed in the way that it was written, and we're going to fight it out until it reaches its conclusion.